Awesome, very good. Well, welcome to the Power Lunch. Sorry I missed the last one. I was out exploring west. I did not get attacked by a bison or a grizzly bear, although I'm pretty sure I look like a Hot Pocket to a grizzly bear. Pretty sure I look like an all-you-can-eat buffet of Hot Pockets to a grizzly bear. But anyway, had a good trip, so glad to be back and see everybody. What we have going on today is we've asked Scale, who's agreed to come present their tech to us. So ScaleComputing is, well, they're not quite a hometown team. I'm not going to say Minnesota, but they're heartland. I think they're headquartered, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, you're headquartered in Indianapolis. So that gets Midwest cred right there.
Yep, that is correct.
But they have an interesting vision of HCI or hyper-converged infrastructure. We've sold a few different HCI solutions. I'm interested in the Scale model, the Scale solution, and what they have to offer, because I think they present a very interesting vision. Let me just say vision of hyper-converged infrastructure, and they have a different type of a hypervisor. So I'm looking forward to learning more about this tech. With that, I don't know, Jared, are you taking over, or is it Marcus, or who's taking over the presentation?
Yeah, this will be Jared. You guys can see my screen, right?
Yep. So with that, I'll just hand it over to you, Jared. Maybe introduce your team and then take it from there. So wait. We will have like I said, Wheel of Death, Wheel of Fame, because I know death is too dark and foreboding. So we will have the Wheel of Fame drawing after this that we can enjoy fun and prize. And I think, and I'm not going to steal your thunder, Jared, you can do that, but I think they've come up with, they're providing a pretty cool prize for today's Wheel of Fame. So with that, Jared, thank you. Oh, and as always, if you have questions, we'll be monitoring the chat, so you can feel free to ask questions in the chat. So Jared, you guys don't need to worry about that. We can circle back and do chat-related questions afterwards. So I'm on my third swing at this. Take her away, Jared.
Are you sure this time?
Yeah, right. Psych. No, go ahead.
All right. Hey, I appreciate everyone joining. So my name is Jared Pex. I'm the North Central Systems Engineer sitting out of Minnesota. On the phone with us, we have Marcus Larson, who's sitting out of Indianapolis, who's on our sales side, our territory sales rep. And then also we have our channel manager, Nick Matheson, on the call. So I'll be doing the majority of the talking. I know that I have roughly 15, 20 minutes to go through this. Generally speaking, I would take a full hour, give you the full, demo walkthrough, but hopefully I can condense that down a little bit, give you a high level introduction of the technology. And then of course, if this spurs any more interest to get a little bit deeper, we can always do this on a one-off basis, and get a little bit deeper into the technology. But first things first, I'll just kind of introduce the company as a whole for any of you on the phone that maybe have not heard of ScaleComputing. Like Keith alluded to, we are headquartered out of Indianapolis, Indiana. Obviously have sales folks across the country. Our R&D office is out in San Francisco, and then we do have sales offices globally across the world. But
Jared?
From what I like, oh, sorry. Can you guys hear me all right?
I just got to interrupt you real quick. With you being the host, somebody's in the waiting room. They just can't get in yet.
Okay. Let me see if I can.
Participants at the bottom, you should be able to click allow on Zoom. Unless I do, let me try this. I might be able to help. Sorry.
Nope, all good.
Okay, here, 1 second. And then I'll give you control back here in a second.
No worries. I think I just found it, but I think you let them in, so.
So, okay. So we're gonna go back to. All right. Sorry. Take it away again.
No worries. Well, we didn't get very far for the couple people that just joined now. So reeling back, pull this back up here. So again, I like to say that we're kind of the best kept secret in the HCI space. You know, we are a Midwest company, unlike some of our friends in the industry that are blowing lots and lots of money on marketing. We don't necessarily spend tons of money on marketing. We're more reliant on our partners and then really just word of mouth through other current customers. Why I say we're the best kept secret is because we actually have a very large customer base. We have over 3,000 customers and 10,000 systems deployed globally. We do have a net promoter score of 91. I don't know if anyone on this call has heard of a net promoter score, but I'll briefly describe it. It's on a scale of -100 to a +100. Essentially a one-question survey that goes out to our existing customers on whether they would recommend the technology to a counterpart in the industry. A 91 is pretty unheard of, so we're very proud to talk about that. But from a company standpoint, really where we kind of cut our teeth really from an HCI market space was really going after what we felt was an underserved subsegment of the market under the HCI umbrella, which was really targeting the SMB to customer, which is really what to market with. So the reason we fit so well in that space, and hopefully you guys will kind of start to understand that as I go through this and maybe even hop into the web UI for a little bit here at the end, is that we develop a product that is a single support vendor type relationship, has obviously all the management capabilities built into a single pane of glass, and it's just radically simplified, but still having all of the enterprise grade feature and functionality that you would expect from your virtualization stack built in from, things like HA, fault tolerance, basically everything you'd expect, live migrations, built-in data protection capabilities, et cetera, which I'll get to. As you can see, we really serve all industries, anywhere from retail, healthcare, education, financial services. We're pretty well dispersed across all the industries. We do have a very large customer base here in Minnesota locally. I'm not sure where all the customers are on the phone here located. Just a couple of the larger ones that come to mind. City of St. Cloud is a customer of Scale. They have quite a few clusters now. I think they actually condensed a few to a larger cluster last year. But so very, one of the very key selling metrics from a pre-sales perspective that we use is by allowing you to talk to any current customers that we have that are in the area, maybe a similar size business. From a technology partnership perspective, you can see that we have Lenovo listed there. Lenovo is one of the actual key investors in ScaleComputing. A lot of the hardware platforms underneath the hood are Lenovo-based chassis. However, to our customer base, that's invisible because all support calls come to Scale. So even though we have a multitude of technology partners listed here, the one thing important to note here is regardless of what component we're talking about, all support calls come into Scale. A couple of the other technology partnerships here that I'll just briefly mention from a VDI perspective. We have a couple there, Parallels and LeoStream. VDI nowadays obviously is becoming even more prevalent because of obviously COVID. More people, more companies are looking at how to have that remote workforce for the long term, or at least to have the ability to have the employees be very flexible on where they're working from while still inherently keeping security very high. So that's a whole nother, hour-long demo that I could do on that product. And then Acronis is one of our key backup vendor partners that actually has agentless integrations with us. So just a brief history on the company. I'm going to try to get through a few of these slides so I can get to the demo piece. We've been around for quite some time, I guess, in the IT industry anyways. We incorporated in 2008. Originally had a storage-only product. The product that we're talking about today was actually launched in 2012. We actually launched right alongside some of the other players in the HCI space in 2012. So we were the first to market alongside of Nutanix and SimpliVity. We all launched at the same event, which was VMworld back in 2012. Obviously, as Keith alluded to, we don't actually work with VMware. Our flavor of hypervisor is KVM based, which we'll get to. But as you can imagine, launching at VMworld and not working with VMware, we were never invited back after that initial launch in 2012. Here's just a brief status of the HCI market, just kind of depicting that it is a large growth trajectory from an HCI perspective. But the one thing that I like to really talk about within that large growth trajectory is that the largest growing subsegment of HCI is KVM-based alternative or KVM-based VMware alternatives, which obviously we are. So just taking a quick step back, what is HCI? So for any of you that maybe haven't heard of hyperconvergence, it's the convergence of compute, storage, and the virtualization layers. Now, the one thing that I like to call out when we're looking at this picture is from an HCI market as a whole, we differentiate pretty significantly here because a lot of the other HCI players are really only converging those first two components, which are the servers and the storage, but are still reliant on a third-party hypervisor like VMware, whereas we're actually integrating the hypervisor into the platform as well, eliminating the need for what I like to call the VTAX, the VMware tax, and having that true single solution architecture. So obviously bringing the storage back internal to the hosts themselves, having that storage shared across the multiple servers or multiple hosts. We call them nodes in the HCI world. And then obviously layering on that hypervisor to work seamlessly with our storage layer as well. So if we look at kind of the common architecture of what a lot of our customers are coming over to us from, I like to call it the traditional architecture, the 3-2-1 architecture, whatever you want to call it. Some people here at Scale like to call it the inverted pyramid of doom because everything hinges on that SAN on the bottom here. But what I really like to point out here is a couple things. I mean, for one, I'm not here to bash SAN and host technology. That's worked. I mean, in previous life, I've sold a ton of these solutions with a multitude of different SAN solutions on the bottom of this. But where it kind of creates challenges is one, just the implementation process for this stack can be pretty convoluted. I mean, you're dealing with multiple vendors, which also alludes to the fact that, if you do have, once it's actually implemented and up and running, if you have any kind of support issues, sometimes I've talked to quite a few customers that deal with the old finger pointing of, hey, that sounds, let's say you have NetApp SAN. That sounds like a NetApp issue. NetApp, you maybe call up and says, that sounds like an ESXi issue or a VMware issue. And you can sometimes deal with that where, it can be quite painful where you're actually trying to figure out what may or may not be going on with your environment. Also here, I mean, just IO path and how efficient it is. I mean, this architecture here, doing something as trivial as being in a document and changing a period to a comma and hitting save requires a total of 7 IO hops to commit down to disk here. Whereas in our architecture, that same scenario there would be 3 hops. I mean, we're literally coming down from application to RAM down to disk and then written across across the backplane network redundantly to another disk on another node in the system. So again, just eliminating all of the complexity, all of the multitude of vendors involved in that stack to a single solution stack. From a highly available perspective, how we're handling this is essentially wide striping and mirroring the data across all of the nodes in the cluster. So that's how we're able to tolerate one or multiple hard drive losses. We're able to tolerate, full node loss, which would kick off an HA event. The only component outside of Scale that's supporting this entire architecture is just your redundant top of rack switching, which in fact we carry. We're not manufacturing them or anything, but we resell a couple top of rack switches, both on the 25 gig side, 10 gig side, that we would actually help implement and support ongoing if they're purchased as part of the entire solution stack. So it's the true one vendor approach here. Now, one of the things I like to do is compare us against some of the other HCI players in the industry. So a lot of our competition took a different path to market from an actual inherent technology standpoint. There's really 2 paths. There's the left-hand model, which was the VSA model, virtual storage SAN clients, was essentially legacy SAN technology, wrapping that up inside of a VM and virtualizing it. And again, not here to bash competition. That model works and it works fine. Where it starts to fall apart is when you're talking to customers that are maybe in that small, medium business side, mid-market, because their resource overhead to run that VSA on each one of the nodes is quite substantial. At a minimum, you're looking at a minimum of 32 gigs of RAM and 4 cores per VSA. Now, none of the competitors in the industry call it a VSA. They'll call it, a CVM or an OmniStack virtual controller. They have a few different, marketing terms for it, but that's really what the technology boils down to. And there's a lot of resource overhead. Now, on the right-hand side is the path that we took. We call it the integrated hypervisor model. You guys have probably heard about it in terms of just the in-kernel approach. Much more resource efficient. We're accomplishing the same thing, except for that same scenario, 4 gigs of RAM and a fraction of a core per node. So you extrapolate that across the cluster. That's 12 gigs of RAM and a core consumed on our side. On the left-hand side, you're looking at 96 gigs of RAM and 12 cores consumed. I have customers that have a scale cluster that are maybe running their entire workload in 96 gigs of RAM, so to essentially have to double buy your resources just to turn on the technology when you're on that smaller end of the spectrum can be quite inefficient. So a few things to point out here before I jump over to the UI. Simplicity, when we say it deploys in less than an hour, that's the truth. I mean, the longest process is getting it out of the box, into the rack, and cabled up. After that, you're literally assigning IP addresses to each one of the nodes and doing one command that says initialize cluster. 15 minutes later, you're looking at the UI, ready to start migrating workloads over, building net new workloads. From a scalability perspective, we do have the ability to support single node systems, so very common architecture. Really two very common use cases for single nodes is either if you're talking about remote locations that don't necessarily need high availability, you can put a single node out in those locations and then use the built-in replication to replicate that data back to either a DR cluster or to the production cluster. So kind of the hub and spoke model. Or another common use case is to have a single node acting as a DR target. So maybe a 3-node cluster that's highly available for the production workloads, but then sizing a DR node that is right sized to maybe have plenty of storage to replicate all the data over, but only have enough compute resources sized within it to run the mission critical workloads. So that's another common, I like to call it a 3-to-1 architecture. And we also have the ability to mix and match nodes. So, let's say hypothetically a customer starts with a hybrid cluster, meaning it has a mix of SSD and spinning disk. And then down the road, they want to either add additional performance on the SSD side, or maybe they just need more cheap and deep storage. You can add the right kind of node you want. So you could add an all-flash node or an all-spinning disk node at that time when you're scaling out. So it allows for a lot of flexibility on how you actually scale out. From an affordability standpoint, this is a big one. Obviously, we are the entire stack, so there is no need to get VMware licensing. A lot of times I'm working with customers that are eliminating other licenses, such as, Zerto licenses was one that I just went through. So we eliminated the Zerto licensing, the VMware licensing, and did a 5-year TCO, and the cost savings were quite significant when they moved over to Scale. Last but not least here, again, we have handle the protection piece. Obviously, we have the local snapshots on the cluster itself. Those are used really nice for, really instant restores, whether you're talking about restoring from something 5 minutes ago or from 30 days ago. Really quick restores, and then obviously the ability to replicate that offsite. Now, again, this is depicting another 3-node cluster. You could be doing bidirectional replication. That's very common too. I have customers that have kind of dual redundant data centers that are running a split workload, some at site 1, some at site 2, and then replicating between the two. Or you can have kind of a cold, DR site that has, maybe just a couple machines running over there, maybe a secondary domain controller, but then it's got all the resources to spin up when and if it actually needs to be used. So I did want to, I know I don't have a whole lot of time here, but I did want to just at least briefly show the web interface here, because this is a little bit more exciting to look at than PowerPoint slides. So this is the Scale UI. In order to access it, you simply need a web browser here. I happen to be using Google Chrome. You point to any one of the IP addresses of the nodes in the cluster. Cool thing here is, we eliminate the need for a management server anywhere on the cluster or outside of the cluster. So the equivalent in the VMware world of a vCenter server is not needed. All the management capabilities are built into the nodes themselves. Couple different views here: RAM view, disk view. We do have a technology when we're talking about hybrid storage, where we have SSD and spinning disk. A technology called HEAT. It stands for Hypercore Enhanced Automated Tiering, where we're automatically moving data between the two tiers of storage dependent on how frequently accessed the data blocks are. So the net of that is your hot data would be on the SSD, your cool data on the spinning disk tier. So again, I'm going to kind of jump around here. Usually I'd show the full gamut, but I just want to kind of show what it would look like to create a net new machine here. So we'll call this demo, and my initials, we'll just call it demo here, and then we'll give it a tag. Tags are useful for logically grouping machines. As you can see here, these big blue boxes. You can also give additional tags thereafter for using filtering and doing group actions based on tags. Then you pick your OS. If it's a Windows-based OS, leave it on Windows. If it's anything else, go ahead and select other. Then you come down here to resource allocation, just as typical virtual resource allocation. Let's say we're going to give it, 4 vCPU, 12 gigs of RAM, maybe an 80 gig system drive, 300 gig drive for logs, since this is hypothetically could hypothetically be a SQL workload, and then maybe a terabyte data drive. Then you just come down here and select it you want to boot from. So let's say we want to boot from server 2019. Go ahead and click create. Now, if I go find that Jared tag, we shall see demo JP is now being created. So literally anything that you need to do within the UI to create machines, set up replication schedules, data protection schedules, everything is really able to be accomplished in 3 clicks or less. We could go ahead and power that machine on. It's going to intelligently place the machine on the node that it feels is the best place to start it up on. Most likely it's going to start up here on node 1, just because the biggest driving factor behind that's going to be available compute resources. So likely it will start up here on node 1. A couple other things to show you real quick before I pause here in a minute for questions. Schedules. If you want to create schedules for local data protection and then the replication piece as well, you will just look at one that I already have created here. Cool thing here is not only can you select your frequency, aka your RPO, but you also select the retention for each one of those given rules. So here we're taking a snapshot every 15 minutes, keeping those around for 8 hours, an hourly for 24 hours, a daily at midnight for 7 days, a weekly on Sundays at midnight. And then here we can actually differentiate policies from a local versus remote retention perspective. So we're going to keep them locally for 4 weeks and then just replicate 2 weeklies off to that secondary site. So again, just a lot of granularity and control. Last but not least here, so that HEAT technology that I mentioned, where we're automatically tiering data between the 2 tiers of storage, we don't have to necessarily take our word for it that we're going to move the data around appropriately. I mean, quite frankly, a lot of our customers do just leave this at the normal setting. But if you have certain workloads that are going to be a little bit more IO hungry and need that additional priority to that SSD tier, you can start to make tweaks up here to turn it up or turn it down. And we have all these settings from 1 to 10 that I like to call our non-absolute settings. But we also have 2 absolute settings, going all the way to off, which would be pinning it to the spinning disk tier, or going all the way up to 11, which would be pinning it to the SSD tier. And of course, like I mentioned, everything in between. So we do use that SSD tier in a hybrid storage environment as a true tier of storage, not strictly as a cache. So you can really use that as you see fit. So that was my super quick condensed demo. Of course, there's a million other things I could show you, but I just wanted to get the gist of what we're looking at from a technology perspective here. And of course, like I mentioned, if there's any of this that's interesting to you and you want to look at deeper, we can obviously arrange that. So now I'll pause here if there was any questions.
So with the nodes, I mean, so your standard, I'm going to just use standard, right? I mean, air quotes around it. Standard config is with a multi-node footprint, and each node is the same, basically replicating itself. So in other words, if you have a failure, you're able to recover yourself for high availability, correct? Or not?
Yep, correct. So the inherent technology of HCI and specifically with Scale is that the main cluster. So I talked a lot about replication and DR a necessary component. We can just only have, a lot of customers only have the production cluster, but you're still getting all the benefits of having a highly available cluster and losing any single component. So if you lose, let's say, an entire node, what's going to happen, and I'm going to obviously size it appropriately. I'm going to size it so that what I call n+1, so that all of your workloads can run on the remaining amount of nodes. So if it's a 3-node cluster, obviously run on the remaining 2. But what's going to happen is it's going to kick off an HA event, and all of your workloads are going to restart on the remaining nodes in the cluster. So we've had a lot of traction with a variety of customers, but one of the new lines that we just released is actually based off of the Intel NUC. So very, very small form factor. And so we've got a lot of traction in the retail space actually as well. Because obviously a little bit of downtime to a retail location can equate to a lot of dollars lost. So having the ability to have HA, but in a very small form factor that can literally be placed anywhere underneath the desk, wherever, or mounted anywhere, has been very attractive. So we're talking about devices that have maybe a 4-core proc, an i5 processor, 32 gigs of RAM, and 500 gigs of storage. I mean, very, very small devices that can meet a really attractive price point. So historically, where customers would put a single VMware host, we're able to replace that at the same price point with a highly available redundant cluster.
So a question from chat, Jared.
Yep.
If someone has interest in migrating away from either Hyper-V or VMware to this type of a solution, do you have tools? Do you have a toolkit to help do that migration from a current environment to the new a new Scale environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you can imagine, I think the actual customer number, I said over 3,000, but right now is around 3,600 customers. As you can imagine, about 90% of those customers were ex-VMware customers, with the other 10% probably Hyper-V or somewhere close to that. So as you can imagine, we have to have a very well-defined process to migrate those customers over to our platform. So the tool that I most often recommend is a tool called HC3 Move. It's actually a tool that we didn't create. We partnered with a company called Carbonite. They have a tool called Carbonite Migrate. But we leverage that tool for the migration process. It's really slick, actually. You install the agent in the existing environment in all the guest VMs, and then you build out a template machine on the Scale side and install the source target. What it does is it creates obviously the initial sync of all the data, but then it keeps those in 2 environments synced until you actually click the failover button. When you click the failover button, powers down the machine on the VMware or Hyper-V side, powers up on the Scale side. And time equates to 5 minutes, the amount of time that it takes to reboot the machine on the Scale side. So it's a real slick from a migration process, and obviously our support engineers are well versed on making that happen for our customers. Cool. Any other questions?
Sorry about that. I was trying to unmute. The keyboard wouldn't select for whatever.
I think you muted yourself again there.
Yeah.
I have a question. This is Paul.
Yeah.
You, in your configurations, do you have hybrid storage, like some SSD and some spinning disk? And can you expound upon that?
Yep. So we have a multitude of different configurations. So we have some nodes that are all spinning disk. We have some nodes that are all flash. We now have nodes that are all based off of NVMe SSD. But then what you're alluding to is, yes, we have nodes that have a mixture of spinning disk and SSD within the node itself. And then that's what I was alluding to when I was showing that little dial of being able to down to the per virtual disk basis. So actually more granular than a per VM basis, set priority access to the SSD tier within that pool. So it's very granular, but yes, we do have nodes that have spinning disk and SSD, and then we leverage the tiering technology to automatically tier data dependent on how frequently accessed it is. Again, obviously hot data being on the SSD tiers.
Kind of like a cache.
Kind of, yeah. So we don't only strictly use it as a cache though. So we reserve roughly 25% of the SSD capacity as a write buffer. So obviously all incoming writes coming onto the SSD pool first, obviously for speed. But the remaining 75% of that SSD pool is used for true VM workloads. So, there might be, let's say, I don't know, a SQL server or something that, it's maybe a backend for your ERP system that's very critical. Maybe you want to actually pin that given VM to SSD. So that particular machine would be running completely off of the SSD storage if you pin it. Now, if you leave it at the normal setting, like I showed, well, then there would be a portion of the data that would be living on SSD, because again, this is our storage layer is actually carved into when there's two tier storage, but it's all happening at the block level. So we're able to distribute that data between the SSD tier and the spinning disk tier and have that, distributed even for a given individual virtual disk.
I have a question from Chatland again. So maybe a little bit about backups. So what is your position? What is Scale's position on backups? Does this solution eliminate? I don't expect you to go with eliminate really, but does this eliminate backups or what we would think of as traditional backups?
Yeah, so no, it doesn't necessarily eliminate backups. Now, we do have, just from the built-in feature set perspective, and actually, Haley, are you able to allow me to share again? It seems like it's blocking me from being able to share. It says host disabled.
Yeah.
Because I just want to quickly show something as I'm talking through this. All right. So again, when we talk about, what we have built in from a data protection perspective, so I'll come back to this machine that we are playing with here, and we created that schedule. If you want to take a manual protection point here, of course you can. You just click the little camera button, give it a name. It'll have a snapshot here. And then, like I mentioned, you can create schedules based off what you find and then assign those schedules out on a per VM basis. So I see customers will create anywhere from maybe 2 to 5 different schedules and then assign them out to their machines based on the criticality. Now, where we start to delineate what we have built in from a data protection standpoint and kind of traditional backup offerings is what we have built in is really built in for business continuity and DR purposes. So really, really fast restores. And we can actually get a little bit more granular as well. So if we look at a machine that actually has some more recovery points, this particular machine has 60 recovery points here. I can go back and look at any historical snapshot and actually expand any historical snapshot and be able to clone and mount an individual virtual drive back into the same machine or to any other machine on the Scale system. So we do have customers that leverage this technology to do file level restores because, of course, you don't want to clone an entire machine to or restore an entire machine to pull out an individual file. So you can go back to a given snapshot and actually just be able to clone and mount an individual virtual drive to any machine. So what I see a lot of my current customer base do is have a utility machine on the Scale system that they can go mount drives to and pull files from. So we do get pretty granular in the restore capability. So I have a reliant on what we have built in, utilizing the local data protection, replicating, of course, to a secondary site. That's where the replication piece comes in. You set up replication, you choose that as the target, wherever you're replicating to. And then as an additional fail-safe, what they're doing is they're actually exporting full copies of the machines off to some SMB share, generally, a NAS device or even rotating hard disk that they're exporting off to. But where a traditional backup software, like I mentioned, with our partnership with Acronis really comes into play of having a nice offering above and beyond what we offer is when you have, specific applications that require that additional level of granularity. So if you still have, an Exchange server on-prem, or you want to be able to get a little bit more granular with, your SQL restores, those object level restores. And then of course, for doing more archival type backups, a third-party backup software is going to be better. You don't really want your archival quote unquote backup snapshots on your production storage anyways. So having a third-party backup software that's going to leverage their software deduplication and incremental schedules and everything that comes around with a backup software to some cheap and deep storage is going to be a good offering. And then also if you want to target a hyperscaler like an AWS software would be key there. So most of our customers would be using both components, what we have built in for business continuity and DR purposes, and then still leveraging Acronis for archival backups and object level restores.
All right. Well, we are running a bit. We're not running short on time. Take all the time we need, right? But we're running a little short on our noontime schedule. Jared, I think that was very interesting information, and we can talk later. But we might want to do a deep dive session at some point and focus on a few of these things that we just kind of got a sniff of today. Hopefully we could work some timing out for that and kind of have you guys back, because you presented some very interesting concepts, and personally I'd like to learn a little bit more about the hypervisor and how that works, et cetera, as compared to Hyper-V and VMware. Anyway, with that said, Haley, maybe we can turn her over to you and we can enjoy the Wheel of Fame. I prefer Wheel of Death. I like the upside down pyramid of death and destruction. I thought that was pretty good. Fits in with my view of the world, but we could do the Wheel of Fame.
Okay.
So Haley, are you with us?
Yep, couple questions. There's a phone number on here, 9431. Who's that?
Mystery caller.
Jared,
I don't know who.
Anybody from your team?
I don't know. Nick or Marcus, are you guys called in? Or are you?
It's not me.
I wonder if it's Nick. Nick Matheson, are you out there?
Okay, what about Michael? I know that there's Mike. I know you, Mike. But
actually, you know what? I just looked up Nick's number. So the 9431 is Nick Matheson on our end.
Right.
So
okay.
Ignore him.
What about Michael?
Mike from Sparbo.
Oh, perfect.
Nice. Welcome.
Just wanted to make sure I could differentiate.
Yeah, we want everybody to have. Oh wait, Jared, we didn't talk about what the prize is, and we need you to have the thunder for the prize for the Wheel of Fame and Fortune.
Yeah. What is it? That's Nick is the guy. It's a Bose speaker. It's really cool. It's one of the new ones.
Yeah, it's a nice. Yeah, it's an awesome Bluetooth Bose speaker. So, I'm sadly NetV Pro staff can't win this. maybe it'll show up on my desk and never leave. I don't know. But
okay,
yeah, it's the SoundLink Revolve Plus.
Ooh.
Looks like it's listed online for $300. That's a nice
wow.
price.
There you go. This might turn into the Wheel of Death, depending on people fighting over the prize at the end here. All right, Haley, give her a spin. See who the winner is. No.
Does he win every one or what?
I think Raj has figured out the algorithm of this. We're gonna need to change our spinning wheel of fame and fortune because we're gonna need a van. I use my 1-ton pickup to haul the goods down to Raj at United Health Group. Well, congratulations, Raj. Another great prize. But again, in all seriousness, Jared, I will reach out and we'll set up a time because I would like to get some more detail on this information, or on the information you presented, and maybe we can put together a deep dive for those who are interested, because I think there's a lot of good stuff there for us to talk about. So I'll reach out. Thank you for your time, and those of you who attended, thanks for your time. Hopefully you enjoy your Subway gift card and think of Nevi Pro while you're having your foot-long tuna fish sandwich. So everybody have a good, safe week, and thanks for attending, and we'll see you. Who do we have next time, Haley?
We're still figuring that out. We decided to move some stuff around to keep it exciting, so it will be announced shortly.
We have some shuffling going on, so watch for that.
Coming up. So we're gonna incorporate a group of vendors and some of our own NetMe Pro staff. So
We've had a couple of requests to do some more information on things like Teams and some more functional sessions. So we're going to be working some of those in. So again, thanks everybody. Have a good week and be safe, and we'll see you next time. Take care.